the fundamental most important thing, giving people an opportunity to feel valued, feel trusted, feel that they can get on and do a brilliant job as best they can. All the other parts become really easy.
Welcome to The Fearless Foodie, the podcast that gets honest about what it really takes to thrive in food and retail. I'm Amy Wilkinson, coach, speaker and trusted partner to food industry teams with lived experience of the pace, pressure and politics that come with the job. Fearless Foodies cut through the fluff and get straight to what actually helps. And that's exactly what we're here to do. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Fearless Foodie. If you work in food manufacturing or retail, you'll know that the pressure is relentless. There's lots of deadlines, commercial targets, tight margins, and teams are trying to deliver all of that with fewer resources than ever. So the big question for leaders right now is how do you keep standards high, but do it without burning your teams out? And my guest today, James Campbell, who is Director of Product and Innovation at Sainsbury's, has spent his career in some pretty high pressure environments and has had a few career pivots too. So welcome to the podcast, James.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first ever podcast. So,
do you know what? So many people have popped their podcast cherry with me. I feel very privileged. And you said you just got off a flight as well. So
just got off a flight. Yeah, so
thank you for being here.
Keeping it hectic and high pressure.
Well, exactly. Living and breathing it right now. So, James, let's start at the beginning because you didn't start in boardrooms, you didn't start in retailers, you started in kitchens. So tell us about that. Tell us about the environment that it's different but the same, isn't it? And what that kind of taught you along the way. So just give us a bit of a history.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're right. I started in kitchens and there's so many similarities, right? Apart from the obvious food and product pieces. I think both industries are very honest. That you kind of get out of them what you put into them, right? They really are very, very grounding in that respect. But I started back in a hotel called Cameron House in Loch Lomond when I was 17, which was a very, very long time ago. And, I kind of just got into it because I actually wanted to be an accountant. And I'd left school and I was waiting for a college course, and I essentially called Cameron House and I could go and get a job there. And I went to see them, and they were looking for a leisure club attendant or a chef, and I can't swim, right? So I had no interest in opportunity came along, and I really, really didn't like it for about the first 6 or 8 months. And then I moved into the patisserie kitchen after about 8 months, actually. And I fell in love with it straight away. As soon as I got into that, much more scientific, much more mathematical, much more precise, but you had to be really, really, really rigid in your formula, but be really creative at the same time. And I kind of liked that. So my career kind of started from there. And then I moved about to lots of places, and I'll cut through quite quickly. Ended up moving to London when I was 24 to be a head pastry chef for Gary Rhodes in his Michelin-star restaurant in Dolphin Square, and then moved over to City Roads, which was his flagship restaurant. And then a few other places. Moved to Australia to find myself, found myself, came back, and I ended up at Mandarin Oriental for about 5 or 6 years. So that was probably the big highlights in my career. And then, then moved from there very quickly, got married, had children, decided maybe working 20 days straight isn't conducive to family life. And I didn't know this whole world existed, right? I had no idea. No. And ironically, when I used to work at City Roads, it was in New Street Square, which is one street away from Sainsbury's Holborn office. So I used to go actually in every morning. I used to walk past Sainsbury's thinking, there's got to be something I can do in there. There's got to be, right? But just didn't know this world existed. And it wasn't until I was going to Waitrose and setting up and running a cookery school for them, I realised there was this whole thing called food product development, right? Which I didn't know was a thing. And then a bit of time at M&S, a bit of time in supply base as well, which I loved. And I found myself at Sainsbury's.
Yeah. So what you say really resonates with me in terms of, well, so many people seem to fall into a career in food in the first place, don't they? Like it's like you say, you went and got a job and then you're like, oh, how have I ended up here? But also that people just don't know that our world exists.
No.
And it's massive. And
it's huge. Yeah, it's absolutely huge.
It's insane, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I do think, I think I see myself in this bracket now as leaders within this industry. We could do a better job of that, right? We could do a better job of telling other parts of the industry that this exists and there's real synergy, and a lot of similarities, as I mentioned, in my time in kitchens to the pressured environment of retail or manufacturing, really. But so that they're a lot closer than people think, and I think we could do a better job of broadcasting that, really,
Yeah. But you've had a lot of pivots, really, haven't you? Because if you think you've gone from kitchens to Michelin star kitchens, then you've gone into retail, then you've gone into manufacturing, you've gone back to retail. So I guess you've had to not reinvent yourself, but you do have to adapt, right? Like the environments are the same but different, like we said.
Yeah, you kind of have to start again a lot, right? And that does a few
Mm,
things. I guess it keeps you humble. You know, you don't have much of a background to draw from, so you're literally starting again. And when I joined M&S, I'd never worked in retail before. I kind of started again. When I did the cookery school, I'd never done that before. When I went into manufacturing, never done that before. And what it does, I guess, is a couple of things. That's the only constant in all of that is hard work and resilience, right? And you need tons of that. That is ultimately what you need in order to be able to achieve that and do it. And I think the roles can change, but your principles never can. So it really grounds you in your principles and what's really important to you, because it's all you've got, right? When you start again, it's
yeah.
literally all you've got, and you've got to use it to try and build and earn trust, which trust to me is a value now more than anything. It's the most important currency that we have, I think, as leaders and people who work in teams. And I think what kitchens taught me was the value of that camaraderie, right? The value of
Mm,
working in a group of people where you live and die for each other and you look out for each other and you feel really close and bonded. So it doesn't matter how hard it is, doesn't matter how pressurized it is, you've kind of got other people that are in it with you. And we used to have a saying in kitchens that you're only as good as your last service, right? So, and if you're in a bad service, it's horrible, but you've got another opportunity the next day to do something better, right? So it keeps you in that mentality of just changing, restarting all the time. So I think it's so important for this industry.
yeah. And there's something about that where there's almost the camaraderie and that trust. It helps, like when I do resilience workshops, one of the things that I talk about is your support network.
Mm,
Like actually, it's so important. Like as humans, we need other humans
yeah.
and know that people have got our back. And I know that, from talking to lots of chefs, well, and having done a little bit in kitchens, like right at the start of my career, you can, the camaraderie can be a little bit close to the mark at times,
Mm.
but like you say, it's clean slate the next day. But there must be things. Do you know what? I'm laughing because this morning I woke up really early and I put Netflix on. I probably should have done something like much more constructive. But I watched the new Gordon Ramsay, there's a new Gordon Ramsay documentary out. And, he's got the stereotypical chef, that
Mm.
angry, shouty, whatever. So I guess it'd be interesting to hear your take. Like, I can hear the great things that you got from working in kitchens, which is, building that trust, having the support around you. But tell us about the other side. Like, what did you learn that you didn't want to bring with you when you kind of moved across into retail and manufacturing?
It's a great question. So I guess I've learned, it was a hostile environment, right? And I think
Mm,
a lot, but bear in mind, I was in the industry for 20 years, and I'm talking, the best part of, 17, 18 years ago, right? So it was a long time ago. And yeah, it was tough, right? It was unrelenting. There was never any talk of HR or anything like that. There was no, you just worked all the time. You slogged all the time. It was a really harsh environment. And again, that made me so resilient as part of that. And listen, I've definitely done things I'm not proud of in my time in kitchens. I think a lot of chefs do. It can be really tough. It can be quite a hostile environment. But interestingly, when I was in kitchens, it's probably when I started to form the way I am today, right? I probably learned a bit more about people. I learned a bit more about how to motivate people. I learned a bit more about
mm,
the kind of importance of people feeling motivated and secure in their workplace, because there was a lot of people who weren't made to feel like that. And I had one particular example where I remember, I was at Gary Rhodes, I think, and I had to work. I was on my own. We used to do 120 covers each service, one Michelin star. I mean, brutally busy.
mm.
I still to this day don't know how I ever managed to get set for a service. And I used to get a young lad to come and help me a couple of times a week. And like I say, it was a tough environment, right? And to be a young chef in that environment was really tough. The
Mm,
very exciting standards, pretty brutal, right, in terms of the kind of mentality and probably, yeah, just that this young person was moving around from section to section, was always kind of getting stick, was always had people on his back, was always getting himself in trouble,
mm,
and it came to work with me one day, and the same thing, right? As your role as a head chef, is you kind of create that mentality within the kitchen, and I was doing the same thing with him. And one day he made a bit of a mistake, and I said to this person, I say, and I won't say their name, but I said, like, you're better than that, right? You've kind of let yourself down there. Why have you done it like that? Come on, mate, you're much better than that. And it sounds really obvious now, right? But he then took so much. I guess what it did for him, it talked about self improvement rather than just bullying him, shouting at him all the time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he then just started, he would look forward to come to my section, right? It just ultimately changed my relationship with this kid, and he worked incredibly hard for me. But his productivity was miles better because he wanted to work in my area, and
Mm.
I wanted him to be there, right? And all of my rhetoric, my conversation with him went from being probably quite blunt and quite aggressive to being really helping them kid to get better, right? And helping them to push on. And ultimately, when you enjoy your work as much as you could do in that environment, your productivity is much higher, right? So it really taught me about actually these guys are here, they're working the backsides off, they're not getting paid an awful lot of money. It's a very high pressure environment. So let's just try and make it as nice an environment as we can for them,
Yeah, yeah,
and it'll
yeah.
just work better, you know.
Yeah, and this is a thing, isn't it? And I think that is actually quite in an environment like kitchens where the expectation is that it is like a little bit like we will rule with a Ryan iron rod, and I don't know who Ryan is, and you know, from that basis of fear, you very much flip that on the head. And you know, obviously as a coach, I love the fact that what you were doing was flipping it and putting it back to him as a question. You know, what's making you do this? You know, you've let yourself down. I mean, I wouldn't say that as a coach, but you know, it's like, it's that rather than just expecting people to follow you, it's actually putting that onus on them, but making them want to follow you because your approach is not as harsh, and it's actually trying to nurture them as opposed to just telling them what to do, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what it demonstrates in that is, you know, I knew this guy was talented, right? So you then become beholden to your own standards rather than anybody else, right? And
Yeah.
that's a totally different motivation in life. You know, your output is fundamentally different when you're doing it for yourself and you're doing it because you know you can do a good job. You're not doing it to avoid being shouted at. You're not doing it to avoid kind of a real horrible toxic environment. You know, you're doing it because you want to, and you're doing it because you know you've got a certain standard you want to hit, right? And it was a very
Yeah,
simple
yeah,
thing, but it made a massive
yeah,
difference. And it kind of really, it was like a little light bulb moment for me, really, you know. And I've
yeah,
never managed people or teams in any other way since. I've always been much more about how do you equip them to be brilliant at what they do, and give them all the support they need in order to be brilliant, and let them be brilliant, and give them the autonomy to be brilliant, and give them the trust and the security to be brilliant, and let them make mistakes, and all these types of things are all really, really important because you learn better, right?
yeah,
We have a saying that I use quite a lot in the office now, where I say, you either you kind of win or you learn, right? You don't lose, you win or you learn. So you
yeah,
win, everybody wins. The people who are doing the brilliant work win. And if you don't, if something goes wrong, then you take something from it and you learn from it, and that's fine, right? And you go again, you do it again, and you go again, and you do it better next time. So it's yeah, it really started me off on a different way of thinking, very different to a lot of my peers at the same in the same kitchen environment, you know. And I got
yeah.
a bit of stick for it at the time, but I'm glad I stuck by it, you know.
Well, and this is the thing, isn't it? Because I know from, you know, what I've been doing the last few years, sometimes if you want to see change happen, you have to make that change yourself. But sometimes that can feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're going against the norm and you're not doing things the way things have always been done. And because I'm just thinking about that when you've then moved into retail and manufacturing, obviously you have, you know, like I haven't really talked about the fact that you got, you know, you're a director at like one of the biggest retailers in the country. That's like a fairly epic achievement, just putting that out there. And so I guess, where do you feel that leadership, because well, I'm making an assumption, so I'm just checking it with you, I guess, that the fact that you did things differently and the fact that you know, have this more human centered approach to leadership, is what I would call it, has helped you to rise through the ranks.
First of all, thank you very much, right, for saying such lovely things about what I do and where I've managed to get to. I think it's yeah, you know what? I think it does, right? I think people come to your business because of the brand, but they stay because of the people, right? I think you'll have heard that story before. You never leave a job, you leave a manager, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh God.
I
Oh
honestly,
God. Yeah.
yeah, and we've all had it, right? We've all had it
Yeah.
plenty of times, and I think your performance within that is a kind of direct output of the harmony of your team, right? So my performance, anything I've done, anything I've achieved around in my career, has always been as a direct output of how brilliant my team have been, you know,
Mm.
and fundamentally, you know, it is all my team's work, right? It's all what they do, and it's just such a makes it such a nice environment to be in because if you set the rules there and you understand that I'm very, very lucky. I work for an amazing business that's got a real human values, right? And it really
Mm.
values that human behavior, and kind of we call it be human as one of our key values, right? And I think, you know, ultimately I think people come to our business because of the culture that we harvest within that, and I think it's always something to me that's been hugely important, as you mentioned. So, yeah, I just think it's one of those things where if people can get themselves into an environment, we know it's hard, we know the standards are high, we know we've got a position that we need to hold ourselves accountable to, and everybody that comes to work has that mentality, right? That's why they do it. I mean, it's not an easy industry, right? None of
Mm,
they're not easy jobs, right? And there's easier ways to make your living. So you come with all that predetermined, and if you've got the right people and the right people in your team, that's what they will come and do, right? They come because they want to do a really good job. So I see my
mm,
responsibility. There's two things, right? One is I will never ever work. I'll never ask anyone to work hard for me if I'm not willing to work hard for them, right?
yeah.
I will work just as hard for them as I expect them to work for me. And, it ultimately manifests itself and you then give people the best opportunity to do great work. When they feel supported, when they feel trusted, when they feel valued, right? It
Mm,
makes a huge difference. And trust is an interesting thing, right? The thing with trust is it takes a long time to establish it, right? And people think it has to come really quickly and it doesn't. So earning trust takes a long time, takes a lot of commitment. But building trust, you can do that instantly, right? And it's a
mm,
lot about how, I guess, what I do with first and foremost with myself, and then as a consequence with everybody else, is I hold myself to account on that piece, right? I hold myself to account on my standards. I hold myself to account on being reliable. Just be decent, be a nice person, actually
mhm,
care about people, actually care about
mhm,
what it is that they find important. Take enough time to get to know people and understand them, understand what their pressures are, understand what their out of work situations are, because they're all a huge bearing on how your days work through and how you manage to get your work done. It's massive, right? But I also think you, as a leader or as a manager, you've got such a huge responsibility for that person. You've got such
mhm,
an influence on their mental health, on their well-being, on their performance, on how they evolve, how they get through, progressing their own careers and all these types of things. And it's massive, right? It's so important, and you should never ever take it for granted. I just think it's such a privileged position to be in, to have that much influence over people.
mm.
And I'm not saying that in a kind of an arrogant way. I'm saying it with a real sense of responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. I wish there were more people that thought like you, if I think about some of that. And I do think there are, but I know, like, we both kind of, when we were, that bad manager thing, and I feel like part of that is because we don't teach people the skills. We put them into leadership roles, but we don't teach them the skills of how to lead. We're just like, oh, you're really good at that, so we'll promote you, which isn't particularly helpful. But also some people are just cut out for those roles and they get put in those roles. And I love what you were talking about there in terms of trust. I don't know if you've ever come across the braving inventory. I did a podcast on it ages and ages ago from Brené. You're nodding, Brené Brown. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And those different elements that you're talking about, because I think the word trust is I think it's so emotive, isn't it? Because it's like if you say to somebody, I don't trust you, it's like, oh my God, that feels like the end of the world. But if you say, when you don't follow through on things, that makes me feel like you don't value me.
Yeah.
That's a very different conversation, isn't it? And you're not using the word trust at all, but actually, those are the things that make up trust, actually, the everyday behaviors that we all do. So it doesn't have to be, like you say, right from the off that we massively trust one another. It gets built up over time by, all of those little increments.
It really does, and I think it's, like be amenable, be humble, be decent, right? Just be flexible, right? Take ownership. Like so many people don't take
Yeah.
ownership. I have a real thing about saying what you mean, right? Be fair and say what you mean, right?
Mm,
Honestly, if you're going to say it, mean it, right? And if
yeah.
you don't mean it, don't say it, right? And so
Yeah.
many people, I heard that a lot as I was coming through in my own career journey. So many people would say to me, oh, my door's always open anytime you want to speak to me, and you could never get any time with them, right? Or
Yeah.
they would say all these things about them as leaders, and they didn't mean any of it, right? And
Yeah.
it's so disappointing, right? And in terms of
Mm,
what you want from your managers, and the way I see it is, and I think about this with my team all the time. You kind of, how you problem solve together, right? You should be able to go to your manager and discuss problems with them, right? They're paid. Their job is to help you with that. Their job is to listen,
mm, mm-hmm.
right? But at the same time, taking a bit of ownership in that space, don't. So go and ask. What I love is when people come and ask me for guidance, or they come and ask my opinion on something. They don't come and try to offload that problem on me, right?
Yeah.
So much more supportive, and I'm so much more keen to help, and I'll get my sleeves rolled up and get stuck into any issue we've got because we do it together, right? It's just it's such an important part or being a leader, a manager, if you've got any responsibility for people whatsoever, it's really, really important that I think you spend the time to do that. And I've been disappointed many times over, throughout my life, and I kind of thought, you know what, if I'm ever lucky enough to get the opportunity to do this, I'm really going to hold myself to account on that. And it's
Yeah, and
especially when you work in a very high stress, high standards industry. It's so important people feel trusted and secure in what they do and all that they do their best.
let's just pause for a moment because I want to share something with you that might be quite useful. Something I hear all the time from people in the food industry, whether that's in manufacturing or retail, is that you've got really capable people in the team. They're great at thinking, great at ideas, great at grafting. But when it comes to influencing the room, especially when it's cross-functionally or there's senior stakeholders involved, the message doesn't always land. That's exactly why we created Fearless Influence. It's a practical program and it's designed specifically for people working in food manufacturing and retail. And it helps them to communicate clearly, challenge, but in a constructive way, and to influence decisions. So if you lead a team and you want them to start stepping up more and step up in meetings, come and take a look at the Fearless Foodies website. And if you're listening thinking, I could really benefit from this or other people in my team could, send your manager in my direction and I'll do what I can to help. Right, let's get back to the episode. And I think also, like you talked about failing as well. And I love the you win or you learn thing, because actually be creating an environment where people feel like they can take risks is so important, isn't it? Because it makes, if people think, if I launch this product and it doesn't sell, it's going to be the end of the world and I'm going to be sacked. You just don't want to take the same risks, do you? That's the reality.
And it's fundamental, right? If we want to win in this industry, we have to take risks. It's a fact. And I loved your, I've listened to one of your podcasts the other day, you were talking about the Halloumi Mountain, right? That you knew somebody, it was a bit ahead of its time. I remember once developing a product where it was a kind of hot jelly. So it was a little jelly shot that you put in the microwave and it stayed warm, but stayed jellified.
Yeah.
And I came in the Monday morning and my forecast inventory planner was in really early. He was in about 5:30. And I said, why are you in so early? He said, because I genuinely thought I'd forgot to range your products. But I haven't. It's just, it's all about 20 packs. I thought, I'm like, so you think, who am I then to criticise anybody else when they do something similar to that, right? And I never got criticised when I did it because I was taking a chance and I was trying to do something different and it fell flat in its face. But probably the next thing I'm going to do, they managed to do well, was probably because I learned from that mistake, right? And that's that point. You win or you learn,
Yeah. So you do, working for a business like Sainsbury's, I know, I've worked with Sainsbury's over the years, that standards are very high. They need to be high. The product, the food element, the quality is so important. And, the team have to deliver and have to constantly perform to do that. How do you make that happen without creating that anxiety within the team, do you think?
It's a great question. I think, like I said a little bit earlier, right, we all turn up to work knowing where we work, knowing the responsibility of working where we work. I am incredibly lucky to work in such an amazing business with such great people, culture, standards, right? It's all the way from the top of the business. We've got a really high trust model at Sainsbury's, and you kind of be yourself, and you're encouraged to be yourself every time. There's no one. No one's going to try and pull you out of who you are as a different type of person, try and do things that you don't want to be doing, right? So there's a really great culture within the business, first and foremost. I think, from my perspective, the standards piece, I think it kind of exists when your teams aren't exposed enough, right? I think this is when the standards drop for me. So your team need exposure to that. They all need to understand what the standard is, right? So it's really important that you're consistent and you're clear and you're fair, right? And you're straightforward with what that expectation is. I mean, our job is to protect the customer, right? So they've got to be high standards, right? They've got to be high standards. And I think it's really, really important that the team understands that they're the gatekeeper of that, right? They're the people that hold that standard for our customers. So it's really important that it's really important to them. And then the way you do that without making it a kind of toxic environment is you kind of live and breathe it with them, right? I tend to, I'll eat almost all the products that we launch and we eat them together as a team. It's not me, Julie sees a thumbs up, thumbs down, deciding whether it goes on the shelf or not. It's not like that, right? We do it as an environment. We get together and we eat the product together. And if I can add value, I'll try and add value, right? And I'll certainly give my opinion, and hopefully that adds value. And if I'm wrong, by the way, then the team just tell me. You know,
Yeah.
if I say I think this is this, and they say, well, respectfully, I don't agree with you because of X or because of Y, and we've done this piece of customer research, and so on and so forth, right? And I think, yeah, what that does, it just makes it much easier for people to try and withhold that standard and understand what they need to do to get that right. And we do a lot of training, we do a lot of things within our team which help embellish that. We have a kind of culinary academy that gives people good skills, and so we get into a good level straight away when they join the business. So they're really clear how to get to those standards. They're really clear what the standards are, and they're really clear that they work in a team that's going to support them, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately we all want to do that. And again, this came from my kitchen days. I remember when I joined, and I won't tell you which one it was, but I took over that particular restaurant, and the guy who was there before me was really, really hard, right? It was a real kind of taskmaster, and some of the team. I remember going to eat there before I joined, and I had this creme brulee dessert, and it was split, right? It was completely split, and it was a Michelin star restaurant. I thought, that's really interesting. How's that managed to get out the door, right?
Mm.
Lo and behold, when I got into the kitchen, when I got in there to start working there, the team were led with such fear that
Mm.
whenever they made a mistake, they hid it, right? They would hide it from
Yeah.
the chef because they knew what was coming if they get caught making a mistake. And then subsequently, what happened is, because they were scared of the head chef, that product got out to the customer because they didn't want to say they make a mistake, or they didn't want to say
Mm.
on the menu. Whereas if you come at it another way and you say, well, look, if you create an environment where somebody can come at you and say, I've made a mistake, right? Because it's probably my 10th day on, right? And I live in zone 9 because, that's the only place I can afford to live, and I work
Yeah.
in one, and there's all these pressures that we all have. Then ultimately you can it's fine, right? Nobody came to work and all they do, and nobody comes to work to make it.
Mm.
It just happens. It's a
Mm.
natural process, right? It's a natural thing. So what you then get a chance to what happens there in that circumstance is the standards don't drop, right? Because you don't compromise them at all, right?
Mm.
You get the opportunity to do it again and make sure it's right, So
Yeah.
fundamentally, what counts, the right thing that happens, right? And
Yeah.
the team have to feel that they're working in an environment, but that's okay, right? It's absolutely fine to do that because we all do it. We all do
Yeah.
it. Back to my hot
Yeah.
jet example, I've made plenty of them, right? Plenty of them. So it's just we just work together as a team, right? And we all understand what we need to try and do, and we try and create an environment where everybody gets the best opportunity to do that, right? And that's the only way.
Yeah.
That's the only way you hit the standard. And I think any other way of doing it personally, you'll get some short-term gains, right? By doing
Mm.
it through fear, or by doing it through instruction, or by thinking you're right all the time. You'll get short-term gains, but the longevity won't be there, right? And
Yeah.
for a business like ours, where we constantly have to achieve at that level, and we live and die by our quality, we've got to do it in a way that's sustainable, right? And I don't think any other way is, frankly.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're talking about that allowing people to make mistakes. I mean, not, if they're consistently making the same mistake over and over again, it's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But, creating an environment where it's okay to own up to those mistakes. Because I was thinking of it and again, I won't mention any names or places, but something flashed up in my mind about something I've heard before in the past about, things like in food manufacturing, like listeria results getting hidden and stuff like that. Like these things can have a real impact. It's not just, that one tiny little blip in quality when we're talking food safety and all of those things. Like it's the same as, isn't it, when in a health and safety environment, when they're saying it's a good thing to have lots of near misses because it means that people are reporting the bad things and not trying to hide those things. I feel like that is like a really important message in this, is like making it okay to fail. But the other thing that I heard you saying then, which I think needs pulling out, is you are also willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of leaders can go, yeah, it's okay, it's okay to fail around here, but they're not okay with failing themselves. And they're not okay with being vulnerable enough to show that to other people. And I know, like I can have those moments sometimes. We're human, we all have those moments. But actually, when you do show up and you go, like, I'm willing to be wrong, I'm willing to be challenged, and hold your hands up and tell people when you've messed up yourself, that's what gives people permission to do it themselves. It's that walking the talk thing, isn't it?
100%. And I think, and guess what, right? The newsflash is you make less mistakes, right? Because ultimately you work in an environment where you want to do your best, and you're allowed to do your best, right? And back to my conversation at the start about working with that chap and say that you're better than this. So you've kind of let yourself down here. That all of a sudden the standard isn't my standards, or isn't Sainsbury's standard, or isn't the CEO standard. It's your standard, right? So you're working to your standard because you've got yourself to that position. You're in this business because you're talented. You know, we brought you into this business. We've employed you in this business because we trust you, because we everything you told us through your interview process or whatever, it really, really stands up. So let's just get on and do the best job we can, right? And you create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes, but you seldom make money, right? Because you're working at a great level where you really understand what needs to happen. You understand, but the process is you take more caution, you take more accountability, I think, and more ownership in what you're doing, and you want to do your best, right? It's really simple, right? But I mean, if
Yeah.
you are in an environment you want to be in, and you're working for people you want to work with, and you're at a business that you're proud of, you work bloody harder. You just do,
Yeah.
right? You double down because it's important to you. And if you're
Yeah.
working in an environment where you can't stand your boss, or you can't stand anyone that works around you, and you're working through fear, and all you're worried about is getting it wrong all the time. And you think you're going to get it wrong all the time. You put yourself down, right? You therefore become the biggest risk to yourself, really, because
Yeah.
you work in this really toxic environment. And you keep listening to doing what you're told. Eventually, you get it right if you keep doing what you're told. But as I say, on a short-term basis, it works. On a long-term basis, it doesn't work because you don't create great people, right? Who want to be brilliant themselves and going to have their own teams and create their own standards. It's so.
And they don't develop themselves either, do they? Because you're not giving people the freedom to learn things, because you learn the most from your mistakes and stuff. And I was just thinking when you were speaking then, I was like, there's still lots of businesses out there where there is still that toxic behavior that goes on. And I'm half hoping that those people are listening to this podcast, and then I'm thinking they probably aren't the sorts of people that would listen to this podcast, but they might be, or somebody listening might be thinking, oh, actually, I maybe need to let go and let myself fail a little bit more. That's going to help my team. That it's that shifts the dynamic. And I feel like when we were planning what we were going to talk about in this episode, I got so excited because everything you talk about is everything that I'm all here for. Like this, we have to remember that it's at the center of this industry are people that work really hard, that are, flipping brilliant at what they do. And we expect a lot from those people. And what we should give them in return is treating them like humans, treating them with respect, building trust, all of those things.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. Thank you for saying that. It's a lovely thing to say. I mean, I think you're right, right? I mean, we've got, like I said, we've got a big responsibility. I see it as what it's kind of what you leave behind, right? It's about you bring people with you, and you want them to go on and do well. And I'm in my absolute happiness when I see people on my team get promoted, or they go into other things, or even they go into other businesses and they go into more senior roles. What a compliment that is, right? In terms of how they're progressing in their career. And I just think it's such a great responsibility and privilege to have in order to give people the tools to go on and do that type of thing, right? In order to progress and do well. And I think, listen, if I think if there are people listening that are in a kind of low trust culture, I think you really need to ask yourself, right? Are you really happy? Are you giving your best, right? You're in an environment where you can give your best. Are you happy to be there? And I think if you are happy to be there, then you probably deserve to be there. It's probably fine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're not, then you're probably in the wrong place. And
Well,
like,
and
it's,
do you know
it's
what? I think there's a lot of people that will be listening that are like, yeah, actually, my manager is a bit like that, or I do work in an environment like that. And I hear a lot of the time people tell themselves these stories about all the reasons why they can't get out. And don't get me wrong, I know there's a cost of living crisis. We've all got mortgages to pay, but there are always options out there. And, doing nothing and not leaving the environment like that is a choice, as well as leaving is. You are making a choice to keep yourself in that environment.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it is hard, right? And it is really hard. And like some of these are in great businesses and great jobs. I think you do one or two things, right? You either the way I did it when I worked in some toxic environments in the past, I would say, you know what, when I get the opportunity to do this, I'm not going to do it like this, right?
Yeah.
I don't like how this feels, and I don't want anyone else to feel like this when they're in my team, right? So
Hmm.
you use it as a catalyst, right, for you to do something different the next time you
Yeah.
do it. And whenever I mentor people or I speak to people on the team, I'll always do this thing where I say, think of someone who you admire, someone who you look up to, right? And think about what it is they do and how they do it. And you try and run towards that as best you can. But at the same time, think of someone that you don't like working with, somebody you've worked with in the past who you've never liked working with, and think about what it is they do in order to make you feel like that, and you run away from that, right?
Yeah.
So you run away from that, you run towards this, and over time, you will start to forge your own standards on how you want to be treated, and how you treat people, right? Like I say, it is the fundamental, most important thing. Giving people an opportunity to feel valued, feel trusted, feel that they can get on and do a brilliant job as best they can. The standards, all the other parts become really easy, right? Because you've got a team of very well valued, motivated people, and I've always had that if I can get people to want to turn up to work, like 80% of the job's done, honestly.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
it gets hard, because it will do, right? When you're annoyed by people, or when you get let down, or you get frustrated, or something you want it to go one way, goes another, and it gets under your skin, then it becomes much easier to deal with, right? Because they're rare, except the rare moments, they're not the norm, right? And I think it just becomes so much easier to manage your way through very demanding jobs, right? When you're in
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. James, this has been an amazing conversation. Like I said, you are an honorary fearless foodie in my mind, because what you
Thank you
do, because what I would say is it isn't, we're saying it's easy, but it actually isn't easy sometimes, to do all of these things. It's simple, like in words, but actually in that moment where it might be easier just to tell someone what to do or shout at them, and you've got to hold yourself back, it isn't easy. And this is where the fearlessness comes for me, is the being brave enough to do things a bit differently to how they've been done to you, and learn from past mistakes, and like you say, the inspirations of other people. So if there is anything you want people that are listening, because there will be lots of people listening, I know there will, James, what do you want them to take away from this episode, you reckon?
Listen, you've articulated really well, Amy, right? It isn't easy, right? We work at an end of the market where whether you're in retail or you're in manufacturing, or, if you work in this country, in this industry, you're working at a really good retailer, any one of them, right? Whatever one they are, any manufacturing site that supplies into those retailers. The bit for me, which I've always lived my life by, is you kind of need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? It's kind of it's par for the course. It's a little bit like that. And if you're doing your job well enough, and you're pushing yourself hard enough, and you're willing to work hard enough, then it will feel uncomfortable, right? So, but that's in product development in our industry, you need to have that restless disposition always, right? That keeps you motivated, keeps you pushing on, keeps your standards high, keeps your motivation up, right? So, being comfortable, being uncomfortable is probably the thing I'd say to people. Just get used to that feeling, because that's what keeps you on your edge, and it keeps you on your toes. And I think, if you think, I always have this conversation with my team, when you think you've done enough, try and go a bit harder, right? Just push a little bit further. And if you are, certainly a product development point of view, if you're developing a product, if you think of someone you admire, someone you love, someone you fancy, someone you respect, anything like that, right? If you're not willing to give them that product you're working on, you probably haven't tried hard enough, right? So push yourself a bit harder. But make sure you work in a great environment where all those things are available for you to do, because the only thing you're worried about is doing the job well. You're not worried about anything else,
Yeah, great advice. And I think I would finish by saying, if you are not in that great environment, there are some other great environments out there. So go and find it, because that, being treated like a human and treating others like humans trumps everything else in my mind when you're at work. And that feeling trusted and like other people trust you, it goes both ways, and it goes a long way to having that job satisfaction, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's where the best work happens, trust me.
Yeah.
It's where all the best work, I guarantee it. I've been very, very lucky through my career to work in some really high-end places, right, in terms of my restaurant career and stuff like that, and I've always thought this way. And when you are valued, you're trusted, you feel secure in your work, that's when your best work happens. It definitely does. It doesn't happen in any other environment. I mean, you're not in an environment, no matter how good you think you're doing or what you think you're achieving, I guarantee you'll be 20% better if you work in an environment you want to be in. I promise you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, James. I'm assuming you're okay if people want to get in touch with you on LinkedIn?
Of course,
Don't ever. Some people are like, no, I don't want to be contacted by anyone, but
no, I have no problem at all. And I'm like, I'm a bit forgetful and I'm a bit busy here, so I will get back to you at some point. I'm just that sometimes it takes a wee while, but yeah, by all means, reach out to me at any time. You can contact me at Sainsbury's at any point, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. No problem at all. I'd love to spend some time and have a conversation with anyone that wants to.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, James, and I will see everybody next time. But in the meantime, be bold, be brave, be fearless, just like James is. That's That's a wrap on this episode of The Fearless Foodie. If it hit home, subscribe, leave a review and share it with someone who's ready for less fluff and more real talk. And if you're ready to build a bolder, braver, more brilliant team, come find me at fearlessfoodies.co.uk. Until next time, be bold, be brave, be fearless.